She is called the most prolific female serial killer in recorded history. 650 young women, tortured, mutilated, drained of their blood so she could bathe in it and stay forever young. Her name is in the Guinness Book of World Records. She has inspired vampire films, heavy metal albums, video games, and the legend of Dracula himself. There is just one problem. Almost none of it is true. In 1610, a Hungarian countess named Elizabeth Báthory was arrested in her own castle. She was never given a trial. She died 4 years later, sealed inside a room with the windows bricked over. The story you've heard, the blood baths, the virgin sacrifices, the vampire countess who lured peasant girls to their deaths, that story wasn't written during her lifetime. It wasn't written by anyone who knew her. It was written more than 100 years after she was already dead by a Jesuit priest with a political agenda in a country at war with itself. In the last 40 years, historians have gone back to the original documents. They've re-examined the witness testimony. They've mapped the political chessboard of 17th century Hungary. And what they've found turns everything you thought you knew about the Blood Countess on its head. Today, we're going to walk through the evidence, piece by piece. We're going to meet the man who invented the blood bath. We're going to follow the money, because there's always money. And by the end, you'll understand why a growing number of serious historians now believe Elizabeth Báthory was the victim of one of the most successful smear campaigns in European history. This is the real story of the Blood Countess. To understand what happened to Elizabeth Báthory, you have to understand who she was before the legend swallowed her. She was born in August of 1560 into one of the most powerful, noble families in Eastern Europe. The Báthory name carried weight. Her cousin Stephen was the King of Poland. Her nephew Gabor would become the Prince of Transylvania. This was a family that shaped the politics of an entire region. At 15, she was married off to Count Ferenc Nadasdy, a political alliance, not a love match. Nadasdy was a warrior, one of the chief commanders of the Hungarian army in the long, brutal war against the Ottoman Empire. He spent most of their marriage on campaign. He died in 1604, leaving Elizabeth a widow at 44. And here is where the story actually starts. Because when Ferenc died, Elizabeth inherited something that very few women in 17th century Europe ever possessed: real power. She managed enormous estates. She commanded the defense of her own castles. She spoke 4 languages. She was educated in logic, economics, and law. She handled her own finances, made her own political decisions, and answered to no man. In the world she lived in, that was not just unusual, it was provocative. Here is a fact that almost never makes it into the horror movies. When Elizabeth Báthory was arrested, the King of Hungary, Matthias II, personally owed her a staggering amount of money. Her late husband had been a celebrated general. Campaigns cost money. The Habsburg crown, chronically short of cash, had borrowed from the Nadasdy family for years. When Ferenc died, that debt passed to Elizabeth. The Habsburg treasury was broke. They could not pay her back. And then, conveniently, she was accused of monstrous crimes. She was arrested without a trial. Her lands were seized. And that debt, it quietly vanished. Now, I want to be careful here. Some modern skeptics have pushed back on this motive, pointing out that under Hungarian law, her son Paul would have inherited the debt anyway. That's a fair argument. But it ignores something important. You don't have to erase a debt completely to benefit from destroying the creditor. You just have to make them powerless. A disgraced, imprisoned widow with no political protection is a creditor who can't collect. and the man who led the charge against her had his own reasons to want her silenced. His name was György Thurzo, and in the story, history tells, he is the hero, the righteous investigator who uncovered the Blood Countess and brought her to justice. In the story, the evidence actually tells he is something else entirely. Thurzo was a Hungarian nobleman, a political ally of the Habsburgs, and, critically, Elizabeth's neighbor. His lands bordered hers. In 1609, he was elected Palatine of Hungary. That office was the highest in the kingdom, second only to the king himself. It gave him the legal authority to seize property, arrest nobles, and conduct investigations without royal approval. He had held that office for almost exactly 1 year when he raided Cháktitz castle and arrested Elizabeth Báthory. The speed is suspicious, but what's more suspicious is what he did next. Elizabeth's 4 servants, the people who could have testified on her behalf or against her under oath, were arrested with her. They were interrogated, and the interrogations were conducted under torture. 3 of them were executed within days. The 4th was imprisoned for life. Elizabeth herself was never put on trial. Thurzo argued this was a mercy to protect the honor of the Báthory family name. But it had another effect. It meant she never got to face her accusers. She never got to speak in her own defense. She never got to cross-examine the witnesses whose testimony was gathered, in many cases, after she was already imprisoned and could no longer respond. And when it was all over, her lands, her castles, her estates, her wealth were divided up. A significant portion ended up under Thurzo's control, or the control of his political allies. The man who arrested her became, not coincidentally, one of the primary beneficiaries of her downfall. Let's talk about what the actual 1611 records say, because this is the part that most people have never heard. Over 300 witness statements were collected. That number sounds damning until you look at what's in them. The overwhelming majority of these witnesses never saw a crime. They repeated rumors. They said they had heard from someone who had heard from someone that terrible things were happening at the castle. Hearsay layered on hearsay. The testimony that did describe specific acts came overwhelmingly from people under torture or from servants whose livelihoods depended on the investigators they were speaking to. Now, I want to be honest with you here, because this cuts both ways. There is a serious 2014 dissertation by historian Rachel Bledsaw that argues the confessions obtained by torture were procedurally standard for the era, and that dismissing them as fabricated is applying modern legal standards to an early modern court. That's a real argument, and any honest telling of this story has to acknowledge it. But here's the thing. Even if we accept that torture was normal procedure, it doesn't tell us the confessions were true. It just tells us they were legal. And the absence of key evidence still matters. There are no bodies. None of the 300 statements describe a specific mass grave that was ever excavated. The single corpse Thurzo claimed to find when he raided the castle was never independently examined. There is no physical inventory of torture instruments. There is no financial record of the servants she would have needed to help conceal hundreds of murders. There is no diplomatic correspondence from the families of vanishing aristocratic girls, and remember, by the legend's own telling, she had started targeting the daughters of the lesser nobility. In an era obsessed with documentation, where every court dispute produced reams of paperwork, the crime of the century left almost no paper trail. That is not how real crimes work. That is how manufactured ones do. Here is the single most important fact in this entire story. If you remember nothing else, remember this. The bloodbath never appears in the trial records. It is not in the witness testimony. It is not in the interrogations. It is not in any document written during Elizabeth Báthory's lifetime or for over a century after her death. The bloodbath was invented in 1729 by a Jesuit priest named Laszlo Turoczi in a book called Tragica Historia. That's 115 years after Elizabeth was already dead. Turoczi was not a historian. He was a Catholic propagandist writing at a very specific moment. The Habsburg Empire was trying to consolidate control over Hungary, which was heavily Protestant. Elizabeth Báthory had been Calvinist. Her family had sheltered Protestants. In 1715, the Habsburg king had banned conversion to Protestantism. A massive smear campaign against Protestant nobility was in full swing. And in 1729, right in the middle of the Central European vampire panic, when people across the Habsburg Empire were literally digging up corpses and driving stakes through them out of fear, Turoczi published a lurid best-selling account of a blood-drinking Protestant noblewoman. That is where the bloodbath comes from. A Jesuit priest, a Catholic empire, a propaganda war, 115 years after the fact. It caught fire instantly. In 1742, another historian named Matthias Bell quoted Turoczi's book, though he himself was skeptical of the bloodbath detail. It didn't matter. The image was too good, too visual, too marketable. By the end of the 18th century, everyone knew the Countess bathed in blood, and no one remembered that the claim had been invented by a political operative a century too late to matter. When the original witness statements were finally published in 1817, they included no reference to blood bathing at all. But by then, the legend was unstoppable. If the bloodbath was invented in 1729 and debunked by 1817, why does everyone still believe it? Because the story was too useful to too many people to let go of. To 18th century Catholic propagandists, she was a warning about Protestant corruption. To 19th century Romantic writers, she was a delicious Gothic villain. To Bram Stoker, drafting Dracula in the 1890s, she was raw material, a Hungarian noble whose legend fused perfectly with the vampire mythology he was building. To 20th century filmmakers, she was box office. To modern pop culture, she is a brand. There's a deeper reason too. Historians Raymond McNally and Radu Florescu, writing in the 1980s, pointed out something uncomfortable. The idea that a woman would commit violence out of vanity, to stay young, to stay beautiful, fits neatly into centuries of patriarchal assumptions about what women are capable of. Men kill for power, for ideology, for rage. Women, the old thinking went, could only kill out of jealousy or narcissism. So when a 17th century noblewoman stood accused of murder, the culture around her reached for the motive it already believed in: vanity. She must have done it to stay pretty. Of course she bathed in blood. What else would a woman do? That assumption says almost nothing about Elizabeth Báthory. It says a great deal about the people who told her story. I'm not going to stand here and tell you Elizabeth Báthory was a saint. We don't know that. She lived in a brutal world. Her husband was a war criminal by modern standards. Servants in noble households across Europe were routinely beaten, sometimes killed, with no legal consequence. It's entirely possible she was cruel. It's entirely possible some people in her employ died at her hands or the hands of her servants. What the evidence does not support is the monster. The 650 victims, the dungeons of mutilated girls, the baths of virgin blood. The scholarly consensus today is not that she was definitely innocent. It's more careful than that. It's that the case against her was politically engineered. The evidence was contaminated by torture and self-interest. The most famous details of her legend were invented after her death, and the truth is almost certainly buried under 4 centuries of propaganda we can no longer fully excavate. She was a woman who held too much land, loaned too much money to the wrong king, and had the wrong religion at the wrong moment in history. Her neighbor, newly handed the most powerful office in the kingdom, arrested her without trial. Her servants were tortured until they said what he needed them to say. Her wealth was divided up. Her voice was sealed behind a bricked wall until she died. And then, 100 years later, a priest with a political agenda turned her into a monster. And the monster was so useful that nobody ever bothered to dig her back up. History is written by the people who win. That's a cliché, but it's a cliché because it's true. And every so often, when we go back and check the work, we find that someone we'd been told was a monster was actually just someone who lost. Lost a political fight, lost a religious war, lost the right to tell her own story. Elizabeth Báthory has been dead for over 400 years. She can't defend herself, but the evidence can. And when you lay it out, the missing bodies, the forged timeline, the Jesuit inventing the bloodbath a century too late, the neighbor who took her castles, a different picture comes into focus. Not a saint, not a monster, a woman. A woman who had the misfortune of being rich, powerful, widowed, Protestant, and in the way. If this video made you rethink what you thought you knew, do me a favor and hit subscribe. I've got more stories like this one, people history got wrong, legends that fall apart when you actually check the receipts. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.